This is a program unlike any that you may have seen before. We are interested in taxing your beliefs, in challenging your biases and prejudices. We want to help sweep out the cobwebs in the recesses of your mind. This is our goal. Tonight, we have a very taxing subject, and our president of the Rationalist Society, Barbara Stocker, will be the speaker, and the subject is the taxation of churches. Barbara, how did churches get tax exemption in the first place in this country?
Well, it goes back a long time, Steve, back to the founding of the country, actually. As you know, many of the colonies in the country were founded by religious groups escaping persecution in Europe. They wanted freedom of religion, but only for themselves, not for others. And the one exception to that would have been Roger Williams in Rhode Island, who was a very religious man, and he had a religious colony too. But he did start the idea of religious tolerance of other people's beliefs. And when the United States was formed after the Revolution, that concept was incorporated into the Constitution in the Bill of Rights, the idea that the government would not establish a religion or prevent anyone from practicing their religion. And that's the basis of our separation, our wall of separation between church and state, promoted by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and so forth. So it is a constitutional concept and a founding concept of the country, the separation. But originally the Bill of Rights applied only to the federal government, and the states were free to do what they wanted. And in 1777, Virginia was first. They granted the exemption, tax exemption to the churches. New York followed suit in 1799, and Washington, D.C. in 1804. And eventually, all of the rest of the states granted a tax exemption to churches. Now, in 1868, the Bill of Rights encompassed all the states. The states were...
they extended it.
They extended it to all the states, and the states, too, had to follow it. But by that time, all these exemptions were in place, and no one has successfully challenged it. I think there have been a couple cases, but no major cases. It just hasn't been challenged.
Yeah.
So it's in place today.
Yeah, I'm wondering though, what's the reason? What's the rationale behind why a church should have exemption?
Well, there are a number of exemptions and properties that benefit all the people, like parks and schools, your services, your fire departments, your police services. That sort of thing is exempt because they perform something for all of the people.
A service of some
A service. Also, government buildings, your courts, prisons, jails, even the streets, that sort of thing.
Hospitals.
Some
hospitals.
Some hospitals, yeah. Public charities, your public hospitals, some other charities like, say, a center for abused women or a boys' club, those kind of things that serve the public can be exempted from taxes. Now, churches kind of got in as a public charity, and it's true that some of them do have soup kitchens and help the homeless and do that. And I don't think anybody would argue with exempting that function. But the main purpose of a church is providing worship services and promoting religion. Exactly what the Constitution says the government can't do.
Yeah.
So in a sense, the government is providing that service in exempting these churches.
Providing indoctrination, really, rather than education.
Yeah.
You might say.
Well, and it's definitely the promotion of religion. I mean, like the religious schools do education, but they have the element of indoctrination in there too. It's real hard to draw the line, but the churches are primarily
Yeah.
promotion of religion. There's no attempt at education in there at all.
Now, those would be religious schools that are attached to a church, is that correct?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of private religious schools that aren't attached to a church, and I think they're taxed. I'm not sure.
I thought they weren't, but I don't think schools are taxed either.
Oh, even private ones.
I don't, unless they're profit, unless they're for profit. No, because the universities are tax exempt too. I think I think all schools.
Okay. How do churches go about getting tax exemption?
It's,
If I wanted to start a church, you know, next week and so on, how would I go about it?
you get the government form of 501(c), I think it is, and state your purpose, fill it out, and agree that you will not be profit making, and agree to certain other aspects, such as not promoting political candidates or engaging in politics or in business, that type of thing.
Yeah.
That you must be strictly for the purpose you say you're going to do.
I begin to wonder about that a bit. You see, some of these politicians, well, we had the convention, and I think, I'm going to tread into politics here at the moment, but some of the religious right church organizations were very strong in supporting the Republican candidate, and I would think that is very clearly a case of getting involved in politics.
Well, you have to, it's a very fine line, because it's perfectly all right for any individual to support any candidate.
Yeah.
But it's when the organization itself promotes the candidates. And I think what we saw was individuals. And now it could be that they're telling their people that, or their people may see their leaders supporting it and feel that way. It is a kind of a fuzzy line there.
Yeah. Well, one wonders at any rate.
One does wonder, yes.
Yeah. So you fill out the forms, and then you have to meet these criteria that you're referring to. I think that's all well and good, perhaps, but are they checked up on this? You know, they say what their purpose is and that they're not going to be a profit-making organization, and there are these rules and regulations. How does the government check on this to make sure that they really aren't flim-flamming us?
Well, many nonprofit organizations, your public charities and your educational nonprofit organizations have to file tax forms and
tax returns.
Tax returns.
We all have to do that.
Yeah, unless you're a church. The churches
What?
don't even file, Steve.
The
they
churches
don't have to file forms. They don't report their income. They don't report their expenses. And the bottom line is nobody knows what's going on with the church books. I mean, last year they asked that the churches report anyone claiming to donate $500 or more, because they were taking these exemptions on their tax reform. The individuals, that didn't go through. That was wiped out. They didn't have to do it, and they don't report themselves.
That sounds like a loophole to me. A gigantic loophole.
If you want to drive a fleet of trucks through it, you might call it a loophole. Yeah.
Yeah. So then they really aren't monitored. They really aren't checked up on.
It's only if someone begins to get suspicious that they see their minister cavorting with prostitutes or buying air-conditioned dog houses, running around in limousines. They might think, well, maybe a little bit is going into his pockets, and they might get suspicious, and the press might get involved, and something like that. But it's got to be some really flagrant abuses, and many times these go on for years before they're investigated. And what happens, one of the 7 regional IRS commissioners has to start the investigation, And then they've got to announce to the churches that there will be an investigation. They've got to tell them they're coming. They can't just sneak in there and say, where are your books? They've got to give them plenty of room to...
So the IRS official has to be inclined to do this.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe they aren't very much
pressure.
inclined to do it.
Well, I have some numbers here, Steve, on one of these pages. Here, in 1989, 464,136 religious organizations were registered with the IRS. In the past decade, only about 20 have had their tax-exempt status removed.
I wonder how many were investigated to remove those.
I don't have any figures on that, but it really takes a lot to get an investigation started. Probably not very many, I would guess.
I guess we've seen a few of these more notorious ones that have been on television, like 60 Minutes and that kind of a program.
That's the sort of thing that tends to get the investigation started.
You hear about it when there's a real flagrant one, but perhaps there are others that, don't get any notice on.
One might think so. I would think it would be a terrible temptation to hide a few dollars here and a few dollars there. Remember, back in the 70s, I guess it was, you used to be able to right away for a minister's license, send $1 or $5 or something, and they'd send you a certificate ordaining you as a minister.
Yeah.
And then you'd claim your house was a church, and you'd write off your utilities and part of your house and your car and all this. I think they did clamp down on that one, at least.
I hadn't seriously thought of doing that, but I know one person that did, and I guess it worked for him. Yeah.
Well, that was pretty clearly fraud.
Yeah. Now, I understand a lot of these churches, not a lot of them, but some of the churches, particularly the very large ones, own local property other than the church building and so on. And I wonder how this fits into the tax scheme of things. Are they taxable for property that they own?
In some cases, the property is taxable, but I've got some numbers on that too. What was it, Lars?
I'm just thinking, we should all be paying our fair share, and if they have a fair share they should be paying and they aren't, why, I think the taxpayers should rise up and let the powers that be know about that.
Well, let's see, the Larson and Lowell study, they went around to 14 cities. This was this was a number of years back. 73 and 74 was when they did their studies, but they went over the records of these 14 cities, which represented 3% of all the private property in the country. And Larson estimated then that more than 10% of all the real property in the country was owned by churches and exempt from taxes. 10%. In the 14 cities, the value was over $155 billion, and cost billion.
You said billion, not M.
No, not M. B with $1 billion, and cost the cities over $4 billion in lost revenue.
Those particular cities.
Yes, that was and St. Louis was one of them that they studied. That was nearly 20 years ago. Who knows what it is today?
Yeah.
In 1988, the New York State Board of Equalization and Assessment counted 7,533 church or clergy-owned properties in New York City that were wholly or partially tax-exempt. The estimated value of these properties was nearly $4 billion, with a B again.
They could take care of their deficit in New York City if they just tax that property.
For the entire state, there were 29,801 church properties that had an estimated value of $9.6 billion.
That's just in New York alone.
That's in New York.
Yeah.
That has had terrible financial problems,
Yeah.
as you mentioned.
Now, do they determine which of these are really related to the church and which are not? Like they might own some apartments that are completely not related to the church business at all, and they get by with owning that too. Is that correct?
I think they do collect taxes on that, but of
Or they're
course,
supposed to, and maybe they do, and maybe they don't. I'm suspicious, you know.
well, I can understand that.
Yeah.
If they're apartments, I would think they would have to, to at least pay the property taxes. I mean, maybe there's a way to.
Yeah.
There's two kinds of taxes on that. Your local property taxes
Yeah.
that support your, fire and police and all that, and then the federal income tax, which is kind of a different thing and reported differently and
Yeah,
handled differently.
that would be income from property.
So if the income goes into the church somehow, I don't know. I don't know. That would probably
Yeah.
be exempt at that point.
This would be an interesting area to do some research
It really would.
and find out about it. I've heard that the Catholic Church does own tremendous amounts of property, and I wonder what is taxable and what isn't, and if it's taxed, and so on. I suspect other churches too, but
I've
that one
heard,
I've heard of.
something like $4 billion for the Mormon church, and of course that's the fastest growing church in the country, if not in the world.
At this time.
And that was several years ago, so I'm sure it's higher.
Speaking of property, like real estate property, how much are the churches themselves worth? Do you have any figures on that, as contrasted with their other holdings?
No, I
That's pretty
haven't
much
seen
what we've been saying.
Any breakdown on that.
Okay.
Um,
Has this exemption from taxation been a pretty smooth path for the churches all along throughout our history, or have there been people that have been testing this in the
there
courts?
have been a couple challenges.
Maybe a few details on
Yeah,
that would be useful.
not that many. I've got them here. One was Walls versus Tax Commission of the City of New York, and this was decided in 1970. Now, Frederick Walls was a New York lawyer who took the City of New York to court, claiming that exemptions of churches from property taxes was providing a subsidy to religion, which is kind of what we're saying tonight,
Yeah.
thus violating the Establishment Clause. However, in the majority opinion, Chief Justice Berger wrote, exemption creates only a minimal and remote involvement between church and state, far less than taxation of churches. However, in 1983, in Regan versus Taxation with Representation, Justice William Rehnquist wrote, in the majority opinion, both tax exemptions and tax deductibility are a form of subsidy that is administered through the tax system. A tax exemption has much the same effect as a cash grant to the organization of the amount it would have to pay on its own income. So the way has been paved for overturning Walls if somebody wants to challenge that again. Other applicable cases, 1989, Texas Monthly versus Bullock. The court held that a sales tax exemption that applied only to periodicals published by a religious group was unconstitutional. And in 1990, Jimmy Swaggart Ministries versus the Board of Equalization of California. The court held that sales tax on religious organizations that also applied to other charitable nonprofit and local government entities was constitution, so they had to collect the sales tax.
If it was charitable. I think you said it had to be charitable deduction.
Sales on religious organizations, taxes on religious organizations that also applied to other charitable organizations
so
were taxable. They do
in a
have to
sense,
tax them.
they were
They're going to pay
implying.
tax on their Bibles.
Okay, no, it was implying that they were charitable
Yeah,
organizations because it tied them in, linked them with other charitable organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess churches, at least some churches, to some extent, are charitable.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I have no qualms at all about exempting the charitable functions, but I think
Yeah.
the religious functions and the business functions in these organizations
Yeah.
should indeed be taxed.
I recall seeing a program on television not too long ago. I forget the program, but they were checking out some of these TV, I think they were TV evangelists, and who claimed, well, they were raising money through television for missions overseas in different countries. And the reporters checked up on this and found out that although they were raising just scads of money, that if any was getting to these overseas missions, it was just token amounts. So somebody, it looked like from the way it was reported on the television program, that someone was really putting away a lot of money. Whether it went into a Swiss bank or not, I don't know, but at any rate, what they were professing to do and what they actually did, they didn't match up at all. So when you use the word charitable, well, who are you being charitable to is really a question that can probably be raised, I would think.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunately been true of a number of other fundraising organizations. They
Yeah.
claim to raise money for charities, and
Yeah.
you find out the charity gets a very, very tiny percent, and
3%.
the bulk of it goes back to the fundraising
Yeah.
organization.
I
so
know.
it's the same type
Yeah.
of thing, and it really needs to be investigated because
There are a lot
that's
of
not what people want to do with their money.
Right. There are a lot of expenses involved in actually in raising money, but the bulk of the money should go to the
Yeah,
charity rather than
absolutely,
the
sure,
people raising the money.
sure.
Well, there are some people that feel the churches should not be exempt from taxation, and I guess there are a number of arguments in favor of that. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, I can tell you why people have traditionally argued in favor of exemption and why I think they're wrong. Is that what you mean? In the first place, they say that taxation would lead to excessive entanglement. Notwithstanding what Berger says, because they've got to assess the property, look at the books, that sort of thing. But if you consider what the government does to exempt them, they've got to get into their ideas and their dogma and say, hey, are you a church? They've got to define what is a church and what is not a church, which certainly looks like far more entanglement than simply looking at the books.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got freedom of the press, and nobody complains about excessive government entanglement when the newspapers and the TVs and the magazines are taxed. I mean, everybody takes that for granted.
Yeah.
And, of course, I guess the government doesn't have to decide what is a newspaper and what isn't a newspaper, that sort of thing. But, yeah, I think exemption is far more entangling than taxing would ever be. Another argument is that they are public charities, which we have talked about, and if they are doing charity, they can list their income. These are their expenses, and charities would be right on there, exempted, and taxed on the profits, like any other business. They're supposed to be non-profit. But they should be, any business that is non-profit doesn't pay taxes. But what they are doing is promoting religion, having worship services. This, in a sense, is a service to some of the people who want it. Something like 30% of the people want this service, and they go to church and put their dollars in the collection plate or whatever they donate. So you know, it's a business. It isn't a charity.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it ought to be taxed.
And it's indoctrination rather than education, I would think.
Yeah.
One can look
yeah.
at it that way, so.
It's something some people want and some people don't, and nobody's ever proved whether it does any good or not for them.
Yeah.
Whether it does the community any good, that's certainly up in the air and debatable.
That's right.
And the third argument is that it's traditional.
Yeah.
You know, as we talked about, it's gone on since the founding of the country almost, and hasn't been successfully challenged. Just because something is traditional doesn't necessarily make it right, as we well know. At one time, slavery was traditional.
Right.
Disenfranchisement of women was traditional.
Right.
Segregation in the schools was traditional. That's been used in all those things. That's been argued a long time. So
Right.
that one doesn't hold water either. I don't think any of the arguments stand up.
Yeah. We just have a few minutes left. I'd like to pose a question to you. Our organization, the Rationalist Society, I don't think we're exactly a religion, but I'm wondering if we could get tax exemption too, because many of the things that churches are interested in, we are interested in from a secular viewpoint. And certainly we're an educational organization, and we are interested in the general welfare of the world. And I think maybe we might qualify too. What do you think?
Well, actually, we are in the process of applying for tax exemption as an educational institution. Over the years, we've traditionally paid taxes. Considering our income, it hasn't been very much. But
We're certainly not profit-making.
We're certainly not profit-making. No, we definitely are not profit.
Right.
In the real sense of the word. But yeah, we are in the process of applying, but we don't claim to be religious.
Yeah.
And as thus, we will have to continue to file tax forms. We will never get out of filing the tax forms. And
They'll never overlook us like they
never overlook our
do
little
the churches.
organization.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, maybe we will become tax exempt on that basis. I think the churches would have a hard case for being educational, except some of them do have educational schools attached to them.
Well, they could easily deduct what goes for education, and considering the fiscal problems of the country, the cities, it would be a very good source of income that ought to be looked at.
Okay, on that note, and with the hope of getting some of that income eventually, we taxpayers would like that. We do have to finish at this point, and I would like to suggest that those of you that would like to get in touch with us to comment about our programming, maybe suggesting programs for us, you can reach us through Rationalist Society of St. Louis or Freethinking 101, Box 2931, University City, Missouri 63130. Or you can get on our telephone at 768-7698. And